Afghan small boat migrant Ahmed Malaki has been found guilty of abducting and repeatedly raping a 12-year-old girl in the Warwickshire town.
Warwickshire, 2:10 p.m. On the footage, Mohammed Kabir and 23-year-old Ahmad Mulakil begin their hunt, heading straight for a local children's playground. And in just 40 seconds, Ahmed is seen leading his 12-year-old victim away. Then, the unthinkable happens. This marked the beginning of the end. At 5:21 p.m, a 1,000-strong Save Our Kids protest demanded the disclosure of the rapist's religion and his immediate deportation. Local authorities declared, releasing the religion is impossible to prevent far-right provocations. Within the next 2 minutes, a dozen police vans arrived. Over 110 officers formed cordons, but in mere seconds, the barricades were violently breached. 3 miles away, protesters launched an attack on the shield lines. On the ground, there were over 100 arrests and injuries. Suddenly, opposition politician Rupert Lowe weighed in. Over 1 million illegal migrants must face deportation to Africa and the Middle East. Just moments later, hundreds of locals began surrounding a 3-star hotel. Rioters blamed Starmer personally, holding him responsible for the 12-year-old girl victimized by a small boat migrant. 5:42 p.m, the hotel was besieged from all 4 sides simultaneously. Police issued a stern threat. Far-right thugs will face the full force of the law. Over 15 elite units were deployed to crush the riot, but they were immediately met with a brutal counter-assault. Locals began smashing police vans. Reports indicated nearly 143 injured across both sides. But then, the most terrifying escalation occurred. At 5:50 p.m, military hardware was spotted rolling down a public highway. TikTok footage exploded, racking up 9.3 million views in a matter of hours, revealing literal columns of tanks. Officials scrambled to issue a rapid dismissal. This is merely a routine transport and logistics operation. Yet at 6 p.m. sharp, dozens of new Twitter videos surfaced, exposing even more armoured personnel carriers. In response, from London all the way to Southampton, massive waves of people flooded the streets, brandishing British flags. By that point, over 200,000 Britons were demanding a general election. Dozens of new police reinforcements locked down over 14 streets at once. And suddenly, Elon Musk went online. The UK government is destroying and arresting its own citizens for patriotism. This made the situation 6 times worse. Within 2 hours, balaclava-clad groups launched an assault on the police. Instantly, armoured units arrived on the scene. At 9:02 p.m, they came under heavy firework attacks. 40 miles away, masked groups unleashed total chaos. Unidentified individuals began weaponizing fireworks. Local authorities reported just 5 arrests. Then came another relentless series of firework barrages. Over a dozen streets didn't sleep the entire night. 8 hours later, the roads were left with the visible scars of pure anarchy. Police units scrambled to regroup, bracing themselves for new attacks. What unfolded during these protests was not some orchestrated foreign provocation. For over 6 months, from Birmingham to London, hundreds of thousands of everyday Britons have been echoing the exact same demand. They are pleading for an immediate end to open border policies. They are demanding a halt to the practice of housing unvetted illegal migrants in 3-star community hotels. The reality of this crisis was laid bare by the horrific attack on a 12-year-old local girl. Her attacker had arrived in Britain on a small boat just 4 months prior to the devastating crime. This was not an unforeseeable tragedy. Opposition leaders, heavily spearheaded by Nigel Farage, had been sounding the alarm for months before this wave of violent attacks swept across British towns. Farage explicitly warned that according to hidden police data, certain demographics are statistically 14 times more likely to commit offences against minors. Yet the establishment chose to ignore these glaring red flags. In record time, over 260,000 furious citizens signed a national petition. They demanded the immediate repeal of guidelines that conceal the religion and nationality of violent criminals. Local fathers and mothers of victimized girls are practically screaming at the government. They argue that suspect backgrounds must be fully disclosed to prevent future tragedies. Citizens feel that keeping this information hidden only protects the perpetrators. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, however, has taken a vastly different stance. He claims that releasing such data could ignite a wave of far-right hate crimes directed at migrant hotels. Downing Street insists that community cohesion must be prioritised over raw transparency. Farage fiercely fired back at this justification. He pointed out that Starmer seems completely blind to the real issue of over 1 million undocumented migrants residing in the country. Critics argue that this massive unvetted population inherently carries an elevated risk of criminal activity. Instead of securing the borders, the government is accused of policing the public's reaction to the border failure. Authorities immediately urge the public not to speculate on social media. But ordinary working-class families are tired of being told to look away. Based on the recent polls, over 75% of Britons now openly want Starmer out. Inside the parliamentary chambers, the opposition has forcibly linked two explosive realities that Keir Starmer refuses to address in public. According to newly leaked intelligence data, a staggering 47% of all recorded crimes in London are now committed by foreign nationals. Critics fiercely insist on applying basic logic to this escalating catastrophe. Whenever daily arrivals of undocumented individuals peak near 1,000, the country inevitably experiences a historic surge in machete attacks and sexual violence. Fundamentally, this means that thousands of military-age men are landing on the southern shores completely devoid of identification or passports. Furthermore, these individuals carry no pre-existing fingerprints or biometric records within domestic police databases. Consequently, a massive shallow population is being actively imported into the heart of British communities. Once ashore, well over half of these undocumented arrivals vanish into the black market economy. Operating completely off the grid, they remain entirely invisible to the bureaucratic paperwork of the British state. It is therefore absolutely no surprise that the nation is currently reeling from 250,000 reported sexual assaults every single year. Opposition researchers argue that these official statistics represent barely a fraction of the actual carnage. Shadow ministers assert that the true number of these horrifying offences is likely 4 times higher than what the Home Office admits. Because perpetrators exist outside the legal registry, an overwhelming majority of their crimes simply remain in the dark. Unregistered attackers act with near total impunity, knowing that law enforcement cannot track ghosts. Yet the absolute darkest and most twisted irony of this entire crisis lies in its financial backing. The very mothers whose daughters are being subjected to unspeakable trauma are the ones forced to foot the bill. Hard-working families are being aggressively taxed to sustain the exact networks that terrorize their neighborhoods. Official estimates reveal that the so-called asylum system drains an astonishing £4 billion from the public purse annually. Every single week, vast sums of this wealth are loaded onto prepaid debit cards for unvetted arrivals. This financial pipeline effectively forces innocent citizens to sponsor the destruction of their own society. Meanwhile, the reality on the streets paints a terrifying picture of a nation surrendering its sovereign borders. Daily briefings continue to deliberately obscure the direct correlation between illegal migration and extreme urban violence. Taxpayers are practically funding a nationwide experiment in open border anarchy. By ignoring the catastrophic leaks regarding foreign national crime rates, the Prime Minister is signalling weakness to human smuggling cartels. Criminal syndicates across Europe clearly understand that Britain's leadership lacks the political will to enforce deportations. As a direct result, the unchecked flow of undocumented men across the English Channel shows absolutely no signs of stopping. Frustration is rapidly boiling over into outright fury among the working class electorate. Families are rightfully asking why foreign criminals receive subsidized housing while native citizens struggle to heat their homes. Even seasoned police commanders are quietly expressing despair over their inability to properly identify serial offenders. Without prior biometric data, investigators face insurmountable hurdles when trying to solve violent street crimes. Detectives are essentially searching for phantoms who officially do not exist within the United Kingdom. Politicians who dare to highlight this imported crime wave are immediately branded as extreme agitators. However, the raw data completely shatters the government's carefully curated narrative of peaceful integration. When almost half of the capital's criminality is traced to non-citizens, the argument for stricter vetting becomes undeniable. Those trapped in high-crime boroughs are living the nightmare that Westminster politicians only read about in sanitized reports. Women and children are bearing the heaviest, most brutal costs of these reckless policy failures. Starmer's administration continuously blames the previous Conservative government for the asylum backlog. They promised that a new border security command would smash the smuggling gangs. But smashing gangs in Europe does nothing to address the dangerous individuals already roaming British streets. Fast-tracking asylum claims is merely a bureaucratic trick to clear spreadsheets. It does not guarantee that the individuals being granted residency are safe to live among families. The public sees right through these administrative smokescreens. They witness the daily arrivals on the southern coast. They watch buses drop off undocumented men in rural towns, and they feel the immediate spike in localized crime. The refusal to publish perpetrator demographics is widely viewed as a deliberate cover-up. If the data proved that migrants were not disproportionately involved, the government would gladly release it. The silence speaks volumes to a population that has lost all trust in its institutions. Starmer's threats of swift prison sentences for protesters stand in stark contrast to the lenient treatment of actual violent offenders. A native Briton posting a harsh tweet can expect a knock on the door within hours. Yet, foreign nationals committing serious offences often exploit legal loopholes to avoid deportation. This glaring hypocrisy is exactly what drives thousands into the town squares. They are desperate for a leadership that puts British citizens first. Meanwhile, working-class Britons are being dragged from their homes and subjected to maximum judicial severity for merely expressing frustration. According to Nigel Farage, Downing Street has essentially weaponized the legal system against its own citizens, transforming online spaces into heavily monitored traps. Astoundingly, over 12,000 native residents are arrested every single year simply for publishing politically incorrect posts on social media platforms. This staggering figure reveals a dystopian reality where writing a controversial tweet carries a harsher penalty than crossing the sovereign border illegally. Digital surveillance teams scour the internet for dissenting opinions while actual violent syndicates operate freely on the physical streets. Starmer's administration is terrifyingly desperate to maintain an illusion of multicultural harmony, even if it requires silencing the very victims of imported crime. Whenever a high-profile assault occurs, the immediate government reflex is not to secure the community, but to aggressively police the public narrative. Press releases are carefully sanitized to omit any demographic details that might connect the perpetrator to the ongoing asylum crisis.